Okay, so we're going to talk about LoopBack. So I'm Richie. I'm from StrongLoop, like everyone else. This is a slide about, all our different products, which I think you guys should be pretty familiar with by now. So before I get into LoopBack, I wanted to kind of set the context for the problem we're trying to solve. So web data is pretty much a solved problem. Getting data from something like a MySQL database to your MVC app and then down to your browser is something pretty straightforward by now. So this is the sort of architecture you would see, or we used at companies in like 2006 to 2009. Fairly straightforward. And it only gets complicated when you add in a mobile app. So we had an MVC app, and we had two different clients, like a browser, which just rendered HTML. So all it needed was HTML from a web app like something written in Rails or ASP.NET MVC. But then you had a mobile app, which is an entirely different beast, which just really wants data, it doesn't care about HTML. And so technically this is possible, and this is how we did it back then. We would just implement some REST-ish controller methods in our MVC app that return JSON data. That's kind of how some AJAX sites work too. But then eventually we started this approach, which is you have a set of services that abstract your database and any backend systems. And then your MVC app and your mobile app, even your single-page JavaScript apps, just call that API, and they don't need direct access to a database. And so this is the focus of LoopBack, is to make it really easy to build these kind of services. So I'm going to go through the features in LoopBack that make it fairly straightforward and simple to build those style APIs. So first, first a show of hands, who would call themselves a Node developer? And I'm guessing then the other side would be mobile developers or front-end developers? Other back-end developers? Interesting. So this should look fairly familiar. This is the hello world for LoopBack, but it's actually the same as the hello world for Express. So if you're familiar with Express, this is creating an app and adding a route, and then binding it to a port. And so LoopBack extends from Express. So the same example works, and anything you can do in Express, you can do in LoopBack. So technically you can write your entire LoopBack app like this, and some people do. If you're really familiar with Node, this might be the best way to do it. But we provide a command line to scaffold your app. So the first command you'll probably use is project. So in this example, we create a project called inventory. This comes with two different modules. One is app, so that's your server. It's kind of like the example I just showed. And then you also get an in-memory database. But it's not really that useful until you add in something specific to your backend. So the next command you'd use in the CLI is model. So in this example, we create a product model. And so when we create models using this command line, they're automatically attached to the database and to the app. And I'll go into that whole relationship in a little bit. But first, you kind of have to understand what a model is and what is an open model and what is a strict model. So by default, when you run that command slc lb model, you create an open model, which means there's no schema and there's no validation. And so this will work right away with the built-in memory database or MongoDB, or in the future when we support other NoSQL databases, this will work. So that's the open style of model, but you can also create a strict model, which means you provide a schema, which is just a set of properties and property types. And so this will work for all databases and is required for relational databases. So the idea is, if you have some data that you want to save from a mobile device that you're developing, you're designing, you start with an open model, and then as you determine what the schema is, you move towards a strict model so that you can freeze it. So we don't want to force any specific style of development. It's really up to you what type of model you use. So this is how you would create a strict model. Giving the so this is the same command as before, but when you give the I flag, it gives you an interactive command line which asks you, what are the properties of this model? So you can say your product has several properties, and then it will save the information you give it as a JSON file containing the list of properties. And so now you have a strict model. So once you create either an open or a strict model that's attached to a database, you get the data API. So essentially, it should be familiar to anyone that's used any sort of ORM, like anything from Hibernate to Active Record. It's that same style of API, but it's directly available on the model. So this example is inserting an object into the database. We also support querying, where you provide this style query object, which is the same for all the different databases. In this case, this example will give you the top 20 products in descending order of price and under $20, excluding the categories field. And so you could run this query against MySQL, against Mongo. It would work the same. We also support Geo Queries, so you can sort your results you can sort by distance to a given point. So if you have GeoPoint data and you want to sort it near a specific point, you add this to your query. It's fairly straightforward. What's great is that this is supported in all the different databases that we support. Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead.
So you're saying it's either strict or open. Is there a way to do like hybrid? So like say I want to validate some fields, but the other ones I don't care, stored as a blob or something. Mm-hmm. And then is there like a way to be because like it seems a transition, like you said, okay, you start with open, but then you do strict. So
yeah, so you can provide a flag strict, false, and then also provide properties, and then those will be validated.
Oh, so it is possible.
Yeah, it is possible.
Oh, nice.
A lot of stuff is possible. So, yeah. So that's Geo Querying, and then this is just more APIs that are available. Pretty standard database stuff. These are the databases that in bold are the ones that we support right now, and the rest are on the roadmap. And so, so far we've been talking about APIs in Node, but the reason you use LoopBack is that these APIs are available over REST to clients. So if you look at this diagram from the beginning, that's the other side, the top side, where you have the product model is connected to the database, but it's also attached to the app. And so the app knows how to take all the APIs of the model and export them over REST. And we also support the ability to define other transports. So if you wanted to create your own custom transport, you could export this in the same way over that transport. So let's do a quick demo. So I have this inventory app, already. Let's make sure let me remove what I just created. So I'll run SLC LB model product. And now I've created a product model, no surprise there. And when I run the app, I get this thing called I have to exit this, the Explorer. So my app's running at port 3000, and I'm going to open up the Explorer here. And this is that products API that I was, this is the REST API to our product model. So if I open up this, you can see all the different APIs, descriptions on the right. And we can use this. This Explorer is just useful for testing. So we can, if I try the get method, I can see that there's nothing in the database. I can, this post method is for creating data. So since there's no schema, I can put whatever I want in here. Now we have got back a ID, so that means we saved it in the database. Then I can run another method, count. You see, oh, we have one, great, it all worked. And so that's the Explorer. Let's see. Yeah, sure.
Do you have like a sample application online that we can play around with?
Sure.
Yeah, the Explorer.
Actually, there is. If you go to demo.strongloop.com, :3000, you can actually play with it. So that would be the equivalent of localhost. So that's the Explorer. I also wanted to demo Geo Querying. It's fairly straightforward, but it's kind of an interesting little demo. So this is the Explorer the app I was just talking about. And I don't know if you could read that. Can everyone read that at the top? So this is just how you supply a filter when you're doing a get. So in this case, we're saying, like the Geo Query example I showed before, we want to sort nearest to this geolocation. So you see, that's how they're sorted. And also I have a limit to only grab 3 of them. And so, I guess at this point I would be thinking this is all fun. This is all great. I mean, I get this REST API for free essentially, but what happens when I have specific logic or behavior that I want to add to my app? How does that work? So it's important to remember that you could write whatever node code that you wanted, so you could get logic that way. But the most straightforward way is to add a custom method. So the product model that was generated, we could add a stats method like this. And then this example is just calling into some library to calculate the stats for all of our products. And then it calls back with some stats object. And then we tell LoopBack about it with this remote method function. And then in this case, we're going to say we're going to return an object, and we want to mount it on HTTP at this path. And so if we run on curl something like this, which will do a get to product/info, we'll get back the object returned from that lib. So we also support, so this is a really straightforward way of adding just arbitrary methods to your models and calling them over REST. But we also support hooks into the other methods I was talking about, like for example, create. So this example adds a hook before you call the create method, and you get a context object, which gives you access to request and response if you want to play around with those, the product that was actually created, and then if you want to continue, you call next. So in this example, we're just checking, is this product valid? If so, continue. Otherwise, Next, and providing an error object, we'll send that back to the response. So hooks, does that all make sense? Is that all? Any questions? Okay. So far we've been talking about databases, but we also support a bunch of different data sources, is what we call them. You can think of them as services too. So this is how you create a data source in LoopBack. And this example is, I want an email service. So I have an SMTP server and I want to call, I want to send some email. So this is how you define a mail service, mail data source. And then like before, this is what the command line did for us, but this is what it looks like in code. We create a model and we attach the model to the data source. And so what this does is it mixes in the methods from that data source. So before, we mixed in all the methods from the database, all those APIs I was showing you. In this case, we've mixed in a send method, and this is how we could invoke it, just as you would expect. And just like what I was showing before, all of this would be available over REST if I attached it to the app. And so that's optional. Like in this case, I wouldn't want to expose my my email service to over REST, but I could. Anything could be exported. So these are the data sources that we've released, are in bold, and then we're fairly close to finishing push notification and user accounts, and the rest are going to come out shortly after that. And so all of these will work the same way. So far we've been talking about REST, but as a mobile developer, which apparently there's not that many of in the audience, but try and think of it from their perspective. So in the browser, I could just call, like using Angular, I could create resources, or Backbone, I could create collections against the correct URLs, or you can use one of our SDKs. So this example is for JavaScript. We create a LoopBack instance pointing to our server, and then this is how you would create the model on the client. So now that we have a model, we have the same API that we have on the server, and so we can call the methods that I was talking about before. So right now we support iOS, but Android is coming very soon. And then we have a prototype of JavaScript, which is coming fairly soon after that, and then eventually Windows Phone will be available. So that's it. I wanted to save some time for questions. And if you wanted to look at any of the stuff, it's all linked up right here.